Hi, this is Lex, and welcome to the Fintech Blueprint. It's your podcast about fintech, decentralized finance, digital banking, investing, robo-advice, artificial intelligence, and all the other frontier technology that is transforming financial services. To get more content, like an illustrated transcript of this conversation in your inbox, subscribe at fintechblueprint.com. So without further delay, let's jump into today's episode. Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's conversation. I'm really excited to have with us Pete Townsend, who is the Managing Director for Techstars Web3 Accelerator, as well as involved all across the fintech industry and the crypto industry, sitting on a number of boards of companies that we know and love. Pete's got a fantastic background that we can learn a lot from, and I'm really excited to have him on the show. Hi, Pete.
Hey, Lex. Awesome to be on the show. First time on the show, obviously, but long-time listener. So really love what you're doing with the Fintech Blueprint.
It's actually a poorly known benefit of listening to the Blueprint is that we invite all of our listeners as podcast guests. That's a prerequisite.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to do it. I've been taking a similar approach for the last 5 years or so with mine as well, with Money Never Sleeps. So it's a great way to build community as well, you know?
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's dive into your early experience. I want to kind of ground folks into where you got your training for your career, kind of like what were your foundational, like early jobs that you focused on?
Yeah. So I did about 20 years in traditional finance from 95 through 2015 before I jumped into crypto, blockchain, and fintech. And I started out at Fidelity Investments. I'm from outside of Boston. Luckily, I grew up, well, luckily or unluckily, depending upon how you look at it, I grew up far enough outside of Boston where you don't end up with the accent. But when you do move into the city, which I did after college, right? See, it just happened there, right? I moved and said after instead of after. And so when you move into the city, your Saturdays become Saturday and yesterday becomes yesterday and you start parking the car in Fenway Park, right? So it's like, but those 5 years I did at Fidelity, very formative years, great place to start the career. Such a blue chip organization and really gave me the grounds of just leadership and management in investment operations really is where it all started, down in the plumbing. And that I do remember one story from one of my colleagues that Ned Johnson, who was obviously the long time at the top of Fidelity and part of the overall, obviously, Johnson family who brought Fidelity into what it was. But he sat down with one of my colleagues who was doing cash recs. And her name was Sue. I still remember her name was Sue.
That's reconciliations, cash recs, yeah?
Yes, reconciliations of cash balances on the Fidelity systems to...
Yeah, I think it's trending on TikTok.
Oh, definitely. You can't beat it.
Hashtag
Lots
cash
of
recs,
stories.
Yeah.
Totally. And Ned said to Sue, listen, there's a penny left at the bottom of your reconciliation. It's out of balance. And Sue is like, well, it's just a penny. And Ned said, well, that penny's got to be somewhere. Where is it? And that's how attention to detail that Ned Johnson was, is that he really did care about the penny because it's shareholders' money, right? So that was one of the great lessons learned of my Fidelity experience, is that every penny counts. And I jumped ship on a whim in 2000 and moved to Bermuda into the hedge fund circuit and started working again in investment operations in hedge funds. And that was such an eye-opening experience because back in 2000, 2001, that was just the Wild West of hedge funds. And that institutional investors were starting to come into that market. It had previously been dominated by high net worth individuals. And so a higher level of standards started to be asked for by these big institutional investors. And so everyone had to bring things up a level. But I went through some really, really incredibly difficult kind of system implementation projects and running those. And it was just such a nasty combination of financial market plumbing, hedge fund complexity, and just running a global team as well. It was a small team of highly trained folks that could walk that fine line between the tech side of things and the business side of things and really understand what needed to get done. That was quite the big project. And that took me through the end of, I think that was the end of 2005.
What happened next?
Well, I took off and said that while I was in Bermuda, I had met my wife, and I met her back in 2002 and actually 2001 to get that right. And by the time we got to the point of, hey, if we're not enjoying all the beautiful beaches of Bermuda that much anymore, let's get out of here. And so she's from Ireland. And we said, well, let's go move to that island, not necessarily as tropical. I wasn't ready to go back to Boston yet. She wanted to go home. So we said, let's go for it. And that was back 2006, middle of 2006, when we landed there. And I started working for BNP Paribas at the time, just as head of operations. And over the next few years, moved up through the ranks to COO of the Irish operation, and then also had a global role on the hedge fund side. And it was the big thing for me that happened during those 10 years is getting the itch and getting the entrepreneurial itch. And there's about 3 times where between the years of 2006 and probably 2014 where I nearly did go. But the other big thing was that we jumped in probably, I think it was 2012, 2013 to say, well, if BNP Paribas really wanted to grow on the hedge fund side, an acquisition was going to be necessary. So went through the whole process that took nearly 2 years to acquire a unit of Credit Suisse. There's so many lessons learned out of that. That was a big, big, big undertaking. And by the time 2014 rolled around, I'd come out the other end of that experience with just this appreciation not even an appreciation, just this view of the financial markets. Wow, no matter where you look, there's just so much activity that should be automated that is not. And seeing that around the industry, seeing that in, going through this acquisition process were just really eye-opening. And in 2014, it was probably about midway through the year, I had that real game-changing type experience, if you want to call it that, or call it a eye-opening experience, probably is a better way to say it, Lex, is that I opened the Bitcoin white paper. Okay. That was quite changing for me.
I want to go deeper on that. And I also want to talk about the types of problems or spaghetti code, plumbing, structuring, however we want to describe the technological pillars of the financial industry, just to paint it a bit. I want to ask you kind of one thing before going into that, which is a cultural question. You started your career in Fidelity looking at things like cash reconciliation, in the 90s. And you saw the machinery which moves investment and brokerage accounts and institutional money and all of that, the operations that actually makes the headline stuff possible, right? The trading, the capital raising, the money movement. And one thing that's changed, I think, a lot over the last 20 years is the perception of the technologist within finance. And so I'm curious to ask you, when you started your career, not necessarily like what you were doing, but what was the view of technologists and programmers, the people who were building the infrastructure of finance? What was the perception of what they were doing by businesses versus what is that perception like now? How has it changed? And if you have thoughts as to what drove that change, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. Back in the 90s, Lex, it was the IT team, as we call them, were just the group in the back corner of the building. And I actually developed good relationships with them. They asked me to become a COBOL programmer back in 1996, 97. I was working with the IT team to build what we called it back then, a client server application. And it was crazy. It was a SQL backend, so a SQL database backend, but with an Excel front end through an ODBC link. Okay, if you want to get that technical. And we built 3 applications that way that were all meant to automate the investment operations of Fidelity, automate the back office at Fidelity, really. And back then, it was just, okay, these folks that were COBOL programmers were moving around from one investment shop to the next because they're all required. They're all, really necessary. And still to this day, I think COBOL programmers are perhaps being pulled out of retirement to fix some of these systems. that go back to the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So I think back then it was viewed as if you are a developer, you're a programmer, that you just sit there in the back and you kind of know your place. And I think, 25 years on now, it's that these folks are now leading the charge and that you've got technical CEOs, as we call them, of startups. And these are the folks that are launching new businesses and have been for, good 8-10 years, even beyond that in the financial markets.
Do you think it's still kind of on Wall Street, the trader rules or the banker rules, or are we getting to a place where the Plaids and Coinbases of the world, like the integrators and the technologists, are the primary wealth creators?
Yeah, I think they are, Lex. And I think we all know where this is going, right? In that the autonomy of technology to drive financial markets. And when I jumped ship in 2015, 2016, it was on the basis that distributed ledger technology would eventually form the basis of financial markets. And I think when you combine that with artificial intelligence, when you combine that with not obviously, blockchain is one thing, but you need smart contracts to operate on top of them, in order to truly realize the benefits of automation. So it can't just be a decentralized database. So I think that things have now evolved to the point where if you are a bank, if you are a financial institution, and those technologists are not in your front office, you're not going to be able to compete.
Right, because you have to speak like robots do in APIs and in code when the rest of your counterparties are robots.
You do. And on that point, and I noticed this recently. I finished reading Tim Ferriss's Tribe of Mentors book, and Vitalik Buterin and a few others that are notable in the crypto space were interviewed by Tim as part of this book. What he did was that he sent out 5 or 6, maybe 7 or 8 key questions that he asked everybody who contributed to this book. And I think 200 people contributed to his book. And each one of the crypto folks that responded were responding in a way that made it seem like their response was code-based. And I think it's this logical thinking and this coder's mindset, this developer's mindset that has just become so prevalent out there in the world. And it was very recognizable in that the way that they were expressing themselves as being like a mathematical formula almost. So I know that's a little bit of an aside, but I think that people always say where we're headed with all this, but where we are right now, one of my most favorite quotes out there is William Gibson, who said, the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed, right? And that we see massive pockets of this growing in the digital asset space, and where you can't put this back in a box. You can't uninvent it. This space will continue to grow, and this space will become the norm. Back in 2015, 2016, I was a student of the two camps in this space back then, and still that to an extent now, which is that there is a love blockchain, hate crypto camp, right? Which truly doesn't understand the impact of crypto assets and nor the direction that it's going. But they look at blockchain as saying, hey, well, that's the panacea for these difficult, complex spaghetti junction plumbing of the financial markets. But you can't really have one without the other. So where my mindset shifted on this, Lex, was that let's start that these two spaces will evolve together. So you've got the crypto economy that I think will evolve. And, to quote Brian Armstrong or Coinbase, where it's an open financial system for the world, right? And that you will eventually have these big institutions, these big financial institutions will re-platform onto technology stacks that are compatible with blockchain and with crypto assets. It's going to take them a long time. Back in 2015, I was all excited that it was going to take only, 5-6 years. And I said that to some people, you better watch out. This whole idea of reconciliations will be gone. And that what I learned was that the whole process of adapting to digital assets is, again, a massive technology change program that financial institutions will eventually undertake. Some have started already, but in experimentation and proofs of concepts. But it's going to be a long road, but I think the crypto economy will continue to grow aside that.
Before we get to Web3 and Techstars, I want to cover some of the concepts and experiences that you've had between BNP and now, and between your work with 11FS, which is one of the leading consulting shops in the UK that connects financial companies to fintech and digital assets, as well as your role with Norio Ventures and Coinbase. One of the questions I have about kind of that in-between time is around go-to-market and finding or looking for product market fit. There are so many different participants in the market that try to sell enterprise, try to position a blockchain story, or try to sell a retail and try to position a token story. From those experiences, can you share some examples of what you've seen as successful go-to-market strategies? And maybe even before getting into the tactics of how that stuff works, it's like, what would you define as a successful go-to-market strategy in the industry?
Yeah, just kind of drawing on some of these experiences that when I jumped ship in 2016 to set up Norio Ventures, that was on the basis of me eventually launching a venture fund. But back in 2016, I had no business doing that. I had a bunch of great experience from the financial markets. I had a deep fascination and interest in crypto and blockchain and fintech, but I didn't have the right investor connections and the deal flow where I was living in Ireland without not yet having a global deal flow mindset as I do now, that you just wouldn't get the number of deals that you need. So I set off just jumping into the startup ecosystem any which way that I could, and landed first in a startup in Dublin, fintech startup called AssureHedge, and they've changed their name now. I think they're Alt 21 now. And I just went in as an implant and someone to help out. And initially with the idea of, hey, they were going to raise a round, they would need an employee stock ownership plan or an option plan. They're going to need an organizational scaling plan and probably something around how to take their product to market. And so when I went in to interview everybody, and this startup was probably a 5 or 6 person startup back in 2017, that I thought, hey, there's no point in putting together this organizational plan and this option pool because you just need to raise money and we need to move on to that. And you're not going to be able to start going to market until you get a little bit of money in, so that because there's a number of, for example, compliance and regulatory requirements that this company needed to pursue back then. And so the whole mindset shifted to, all right, how are we actually going to get this out into customers' hands? And that was probably my first experience of going through that with a startup. And there was some trial and error. There was, well, hey, let's start thinking about this. What is the business model here? Well, this is a B2B business model. Could there be a B2B2B business model attached to that? And I think one of the first things you need to think about is that when you are putting your go-to-market strategy in place, people call it a business model, people call it a distribution channel, whatever you want to call it, but it probably is more rightly a distribution channel. Who are the types of customers you're going to sell to? And even before you get to that point, it's, well, what is the problem that you're solving for them? And the trial and error we did was, well, hey, we should be able to distribute this product through, say, professional services firms. So let's go start to build a relationship with them and get some referrals. But the first big thing that you really need to do was to actually have this in customers' hands before you even start thinking about alternative channels to go through. So being able to get those first 3, 4, 5 customers on board in a beta environment, in a proof of concept, whatever, was critically important. And I think that, for 2017 into 2018, I worked with probably 4, 5, 6 different companies with that same approach. But that's where I came across 11FS. So was introduced to Simon Taylor from 11FS through Colin Platt. The two of them were originally podcasting co-hosts themselves. And I just got to talking to them about, let's think about this digital asset manager concept. And this digital asset manager concept was that let's see how we might be able to build some propositions around, say, digital wealth management. And there was that where it was really drawing on my experience for 20 years in the asset management and hedge fund sector. But it was also for 2 years that I had been out in the open with pursuing this fintech and crypto and blockchain mindset for financial markets. And what happened with that is that we were probably a little bit too early, and that I was, relying on all of my contacts that I had out of the asset management sector, the hedge fund sector, to be able to say, hey, listen, we've got these ideas from 11FS where we're going to be able to perhaps build a small proposition for you to test this out and say, let's get something into customers' hands and get it into their hands within a few months of starting to build something. And that was probably, the best thing that I got out of that 11FS experience, Lex, was experience with podcasting. And I'd say the best thing, the best thing that 11FS got out of that experience was, well, someone that would speak well of them down the road. I've stayed in touch with Simon Taylor. It was a great experience, but it was, again, we were just way too early in terms of trying to get a digital wealth manager or a digital asset manager app into the hands of these institutional fund managers that I had contacts with. And you really just have to know, like I said, who are the types of customers that you're going to try to service here. And you need to make sure that your approach is right sized for them. And that even the very core of it, the problem that you're solving is the right problem to solve for them.
Simon Taylor is fantastic. For our audience, I definitely recommend Fintech Brain Food, which is his new publication. He's a friend of the show and puts out great content. I want to do a bit of an aside here, or maybe make a meta commentary again in the way that we did about the role of technologists changing so drastically. And, it's a commentary on this go-to-market motion that it has been developed in response to the rise of fintech. And the go-to-market motion that's been developed in response to the rise of fintech has been, okay, in the early 2010s, there were a number of B2C champions across different categories, whether it's digital investing or banking or payments. And then there were the number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5 players that were all venture funded, but maybe weren't as bent on achieving, retail product market fit. And so the natural strategy in that case is to go B2B and to private label your software and then to tell stories on behalf of traditional financial institutions around digital transformation. And I feel like in the time that you're talking about, probably around 2015 in the US and maybe 2017, 2016 in Europe, that motion really kind of accelerated. And what you saw was big banks really leaning into corporate venture capital, building out innovation programs or, innovation arms with a chief innovation officer and kind of a standardized pilot program that startups could participate in. You get paid $250,000 to build a bespoke pilot, things of that nature. And you sort of had like a cottage industry of enterprise sales combined with this innovation language. And meanwhile, the big banks could go out on their quarterly earnings and talk about being tech forward. And this is how they're defending themselves from Apple, Google, Amazon, you name it. And, it's 2023 now. Time has passed, probably 5 years. I want to just reflect on whether that motion makes sense for anyone at all. If you look at the big tech firms, you don't have Google or, Facebook or Meta going out and saying, here's our virtual reality pilot programs, build this for us. And if we like it, we might rent it and eventually buy you. It just doesn't seem to work like that in the tech forward industries. And then I also know a lot of companies that have struggled getting to broad market traction after they get plugged into, sort of the pilot circuit. When I was at Consensus, this is something we did at scale. We had a lot of enterprise deployments and kind of trying to put digital assets at the heart of finance. And you end up getting caught in the sort of the innovation circuit and not the operating business circuit. So is this still the right go-to-market motion? Why don't we see it elsewhere? And how can it be improved?
We're dealing with financial institutions here, right? And that financial institutions have these big seatbelts on them called regulation. And they naturally just have to move slower. And all of their product development cycles are naturally slowed down by, I remember these 85-page product level description documents that needed to be signed off before the development was even started by compliance, by legal, by internal audit, by everybody. And sometimes those things just get caught up and just piles and piles and piles of red tape. And so people said, how could we actually do this with a bit more freedom? And it was the product development folks and, the new business development people in the financial institutions, like you said, back in 2015, 16, 17, that were like, well, can we set up a separate hub to do this and engage with some startups out there and try to get some ideas in that would help us to identify the best way to build. And Fidelity do this really well right now, Lex, is that, let's look 3 to 5 years out. How do we expect consumers to be engaging with financial services? And what are the technologies that will enable them to do so? And we need to become fluent with those. And that may be across a whole host of different emerging technologies. And they've got their whole kind of watchtower and radar system set up to look at who's doing what out there. And I think you need to decide what your outcome is that you want out of all of this. And if you just want this innovation hub or R&D team or whatever you want to call it, startup engagement team, to be creating some value-add experience for your executives and your top performers that you want to stay engaged in the bank, well, do that. And just be clear that it needs a budget and it's going to be an ongoing process. But are you going to expect that it does too much in terms of developing new product? Probably not. If you want to give it some teeth, you can start there. You could start in the same place, but you have to then think, well, again, what is the outcome? Where is it that we want to be? And fine, start with a watchtower, start with engaging with startups, going to accelerators, going to the incubators, and just trying to meet people and meet, new startups that are working on some really interesting problems in the financial markets and doing so with new tech. And then eventually you move to, well, you know what? Maybe we'll house a little bit of a real estate play here. We've got some excess capacity in an office in this city that is in an innovative hub, or this city is viewed to be an innovation hub around the world. London or Berlin, New York, Austin, whatever, San Francisco, Miami, and say, well, let's position this as a way to engage directly with startups, and we'll offer them some space, and we'll put some light programs around them, and perhaps offer them the opportunity to get some mentorship from some of their executives. Great. They show some organizational acceptance of that. They can make that work. And then you start to move up the ladder a bit. And when you start to move up the ladder, that's along the lines of, well, are we going to start making some investments here? Perhaps just some grants, and say, we'll give a 5-figure grant to the winner of this startup competition. And from there, moving up the ladder to corporate venture capital and beyond. So it's kind of deciding what is the outcome that you want here. Lots of large organizations know that, are they going to be able to completely reposition their business quickly? No, they're not. But could they get a seat at the table and realize some of the upside, both financially, which isn't always the biggest driver for them if they're placing some bets and perhaps building a corporate venture portfolio of 25 to 30 investments. But it's really going to be on the side of the upside of that organizational learning. The more and more teeth that you put around a program like this, and the more capital you have at risk, the better you need your investment decision making to be, right? And where you're identifying where you're going to spend your time. And so you definitely will have more deeper organizational learnings if you are actually putting some capital at risk here. So again, it's deciding on the outcome that you want. Is this what we call startup tourism, or is it the route to corporate venture capital and the route to deep organizational learning?
Right. That's a very interesting take on it. And, in the context of cost, this type of organizational learning can be cheaper than paying, $5 million to McKinsey for a 150-page presentation. So it's much more hands-on. One more question on this topic, which is, in the past when I've thought about digital transformation and kind of how these programs are structured and whether you separate things out from the operating business and have to hire different people, or whether you try to integrate it into the operating business so that it's got tacit operating approval, like all these issues are kind of wound up. The thing that to me seemed like the biggest blocker was employee incentives, where if you're at a bank, you're getting a salary and a bonus, and maybe some of your bonus is in equity, but your equity is not going to pop. It's going to be 95% correlated with the decisions of the Federal Reserve. To the upside, to the downside, it's going to be correlated with, the fraud that can be perpetrated by your teams. And then on the startup side, you have massive incentives of equity and very little cash. So you're constantly taking huge payoff risks. And I could never figure out a way to square that. Like, how do you get a financial enterprise to have people in it that are behaving as if they are founders?
It's difficult. And I mean, this comes down to everyone's own personal risk appetite. In that, do you have the appetite to completely let go of your salary and your bonus and jump in to try to make change in the world? You either do or you don't. And everybody's different. And generally, when you find a startup founder, that's what they've done. And that the startup founders I invest in are those that have completely cut the cord, right, from their day job. So when you're on the inside of an organization, it is limited upside, like you said, and limited downside. Downside being, well, yeah, could you get fired? Yeah, absolutely could. Could there be a downsizing? Could there be a fraud in your team? Absolutely, all that. But are you going to completely lose your shirt because you've put so much personal capital into this and that is now all gone? No, you won't, right? You have your own probably social capital and relationship capital that are at risk. But that's if you move on to the next firm, hopefully you carry that with you. With a startup, yeah, the sky's the limit. And the incentivization there is what I find in some of the best founders, Lex, is that money isn't even an object for them. It's just they have a view of the world that they want to realize and that they've got deep firsthand experience in the problem they're solving. And they're passionate about that problem and getting a large scale solution to that problem, not only just that small problem they're starting with solving, but the adjacent problems and building a scalable business around that. That's what really drives them. The money is an afterthought. And, the kind of go-to-market mantra that we subscribe to is that find your product market fit and the money will follow. And, build yourself a scalable $1 billion plus business and the money will follow, right?
Absolutely. So I think this is a good transition for us into your venture and Techstars experience. Can you tell us about the accelerator? How does it work? And then what is your focus in particular?
Yes, absolutely. So the Techstars Web3 program is a 13-week accelerator program. We run virtually, mostly virtually. We do meet up in 3 cities around the world at the beginning, middle, and end of the program. But our focus is on founders who are building the decentralized internet and tokenized economies and helping to onboard the first 1 billion users of Web3. And above all else, we just focus on excellent founders. And while we know that there are strong propositions around crypto, DeFi, the creator economy, and a number of other verticals of Web3, that we kind of have some strong beliefs around things such as investment utilities, DAO tooling, token-gated experiences, and other areas, and kind of looking at the overall Web3 landscape as the protocolization of web services. And that is a quote from Sam Williams from Arweave, where I was talking to him about this and said, I was thinking about extending our thesis around Web3 to VR a year and a half ago. And 2 things happened. One, I did a lot more reading and said, if you want to do that, you probably need to invest in VR headsets and infrastructure and data cabling that can move at twice the speed of light. And that wasn't my thing. And, I'm not a hardware investor. And then Sam Williams saying, Pete, it's the protocolization of web services. And that's what you really want to focus on. So email back in the 90s, SMTP is a protocol. Now we have in crypto, Bitcoin is a protocol. Ethereum is a protocol. And that we've got this movement that has happened to, again, with something like Arweave, which is data storage. It is a protocol. Sam was saying, how far can we actually move along this line? Could we imagine anything provided as a web service right now? E-commerce, could that just become an open source protocol, right? Could Amazon and Shopify, perhaps on the B2B side, become a protocol, right? So we are really pushing the boundaries out on that side. One of the things in terms of the company, the types of companies that we look for, ideally, you're in the first 1 to 2 years of your life as a company. We are, or a project. And, with that distinction that those that are going to remain centralized are companies, and those that will be decentralized over time are generally referred to as projects. And that Techstars is known as the world's largest pre-seed VC. And we also have this 13-week accelerator program that we put on top of that as well. So ideally, that we're going to get those companies, like I said, in the first 1 to 2 years of their existence, where a pre-seed investment is something that they are pursuing. And we generally take them on a journey in the first month of the program where we introduce them to 50 or 60 mentors, and that we have a structured session over 2 weeks called Mentor Madness. And what that results in is one of two things. Either the company or project that's come into the accelerator program has basically confirmed the majority of their assumptions that they're headed in the right direction. Or they say, wait a second, back to the drawing board. We've got to start our customer discovery process, as we call it, all over again to say, what's the ideal customer profile? What is the true problem we're solving for them? What is really going to make a difference here? And then over the course of the rest of the program, by working with those mentors, you either accelerate, if you're in that first camp that you've confirmed your assumptions and you move faster, or if you're in the second camp where you got to go back to the drawing board, those mentors and our Techstars team help those founders to re-identify where they're headed and to get that plan in place to start to accelerate and start to move quicker. By the third month of the program, what we're doing is that we're getting ready for the investor engagement. Ideally, everyone's engaging with investors all throughout the program, but it's really the work that we do in the program to say, what is it that you're selling? Who are you selling it to? And how much are they going to pay you for it? And what does that mean for the company or project in terms of being able to put a plan together? But also, if they're going to put a plan together, how much do they need to fund that plan? Generally, that's going to be a pre-seed round of, 500 to 700K up to $1 million or a little bit more than that, depending upon where they are and the amount of runway that they're looking for. So we do this once a year for the Techstars Web3 program. A number of other programs within Techstars run twice a year. There's, I think, nearly 50 Techstars programs around the world. This one, like I said, although I do live in Dublin and my investment principal, Hugh McGurr, also lives in Dublin, we run this globally. We source globally. Web3 is such a small market right now that if you were to try to source from any one geography and try to bring startups for an in-person program to any one geography for 13 weeks, you're just not going to get access to the best founders. And ideally, what we're looking to do here is invest in the top 1.5% to 2%, probably more close to the top 1 to 1.5% founders. So if we're going to pick 12 companies to invest in come February of next year, with the program starting in March, we need somewhere in the region of 750 to 800 applications. So we've got a lot of work to do. Applications, I'd say, Lex, by the time you publish this, applications opened on the 12th of September. So we're just ramping up now into getting those first, a couple hundred applications in, hopefully.
I want to parse a bit the thesis and some of the assumptions of the thesis against what we've seen in the market and the performance of these things in the market. And in particular, I'm a big proponent of what during the last hype cycle people would say was the metaverse. But I think having spent something like $12 billion in R&D from Meta and rebranding the company, as well as burning tons of capital on NFTs and so on, a lot of these words are kind of out of fashion, regardless of the fundamentals. People aren't engaging in the fundamentals because they had a poor capital markets experience. And so in my own attempt to form a thesis around the space, and I'm a long-term believer in the financial architecture of Web3 networks and what they can deliver, I wonder where we are seeing the most sticky or the most likely traction. Maybe we can start with talking about what in your portfolio, or not necessarily in your portfolio, but what in your thesis, hasn't worked. What are some of the things that we as an industry thought, all right, well, that's clearly going to happen. But in the last market cycle, ended up getting ruled out. And then by articulating perhaps some of the things that operationally didn't work, we can highlight the types of things that going forward are likely to be areas of both investment and growth.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, Lex, with metaverse, right? And that I got very excited about this in 2021 when I read Ready Player One. And I think anybody that had a podcast or a newsletter or anything was referring, or those folks were referring to Ready Player One, the movie and or the book before that by Ernest Cline, which was an easy read and a lot of fun to read. And the movie painted this wonderful picture of the metaverse. And books back to Neil Stephenson with Snow Crash and Diamond Age after that. I mean, everyone, you get very excited by science fiction, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned in science fiction. And the fact is, the key word is right there in the title of the vertical, fiction, right? So Ready Player One, for example, took place in the year 2045. And Apple, with their new VR headset, it unmistakably looks just like the headset that's being used in Ready Player One, which is a mix of AR and VR together. And what I learned quickly when doing some reading around this was that, like I was saying earlier, metaverse, the Hollywood version of the metaverse that gets people so excited, we're not there yet technologically. We need data to move at twice the speed of light. Now, we could test that assumption around another time, but the VR headset's just not there. And the adoption of these and the price level and the cost of all that, with so many different views on what metaverse is and what it isn't, we could say that having a conversation on Zoom is, well, you're in the metaverse. You're engaging with people virtually, right? It's a flat screen rather than 3D. So I think that was one of the big things, is that do people really want to be spending their time in these metaverse zones that are basically a 2D engagement on a computer screen? Probably not. And that's the majority of kind of the Web3 linked metaverse zones or metaverse propositions that were out there. That's what it was all on. And I think that was one of the big lessons learned out of this space. And, you mentioned Meta's experience as well, and 12 billion they spent there. And it's that, again, the technology is just not there yet. It will get there eventually, but we're not there yet. So metaverse had been described as the live 3D version of the internet. And again, I think it's going to take a while before we get there. Looking at some of the other areas, I think it was any of the consumer propositions. And we did a lot of those in year one of the program back in 2022. And that was quite a wild ride in launching an accelerator program at the height of the bull market, where we were sourcing for companies back in, October, November into December of 2021. And what we learned was that the UX just is not there. And that you almost, over the lifetime of digital assets, the lifetime of crypto, what's happened is that so much more focus, and rightly so, and investment and time and attention and developer resources went into security over the user experience. And where you needed these assets to be secured, you needed that to be bomb-proof before you could actually create an enjoyable, easy-to-use experience around securing crypto and securing digital assets and engaging with them online and engaging with tokens and using them for things online. And that continues just to be clunky and difficult. And I think any consumer proposition that seemed like a great idea, there was so many that ended with to earn, right? There's play to earn, there's learn to earn, there's so many of those. And that they were focused on consumers, but predicated upon the expectation that someone would be very comfortable engaging with a non-custodial wallet. And even when you start to say these things to people who are not crypto friendly, they're like, what does that mean? And having to learn how to use them. Perhaps if you are going to start to accrue some value here, that you're going to engage with a hardware wallet, some of that stuff is just scary. So the big lesson learned there was anything really at the consumer level that required a lot of interaction with non-custodial wallets was going to be a very difficult proposition to scale. And then obviously the metaverse side as well. And that's definitely informed how we're looking at the world now.
Timing is impossible to tell and always frustrating, but you have to be prepared for when it comes. So how are you positioning for the next leg of the journey? In my view, so much of that leg is about consumer discretionary spending and the broader macro picture until people, on average, get their balance sheets in order, until people can afford their mortgages and their rent and interest rates stabilize. And we're kind of through the recession grinder. In some sense, we're locked into the current risk-off situation. But that isn't a permanent situation, no more than 0% interest rates or negative interest rates were a permanent situation. So how do you think about positioning for the right things and in screening the hundreds of applications of companies that want to be in the accelerator? What catches your attention? What are the hooks?
From top down, the formula we follow is 6 criteria, right? And the first 3 of them are founder, right? Team. The team needs to be strong. And then we look at the market. Is it a big market? Is this something where we can see some significant growth potential here? And in Web3, that you're assuming that, yes, the growth will come and that it is a small market as it stands today. Then we look at the traction and we look at the product and how well developed it is and what are some of the ideas and assumptions around that. But starting with the founders, that's where it all begins, and that you really have to do your deep due diligence on the founders themselves. But anything coming into our program needs to tick a certain number of boxes to begin with. And some of the questions we ask, and it's just kind of top of the funnel type things, is, are you centralized or are you decentralized? Or are you going to become decentralized is probably the more correct way to say it, because it's nearly impossible to start out completely decentralized. So if they're going to be a centralized company, we know that their fundraising vehicle is going to be equity rather than a token most of the time. And that we are going to pursue a certain path with them and a certain go-to-market strategy. And what we're seeing those companies look like is the word infrastructure is used a lot. Coming out of that first cycle in 2022 with our first 9 investments, what we realize is that there's a lot of holes to fill on the infrastructure side. So making investments in things that will help to spur adoption. What are the types of technologies and types of propositions that will say, hey, we're going to actually be able to open up the floodgates here for hundreds of billions of institutional capital to come into crypto. For example, we invested in a company called Osprey earlier this year. People are saying, Pete, what is RegTech doing in Web3? It's like, well, it's a travel rule solution for crypto packaged up with blockchain analytics, as well as KYC, KYB, know your customer, know your business. And that with those types of solutions in place, that those help institutions to feel safer around crypto because they know that they can look at everything. They know they've got a full scope of meeting regulatory compliance there. And so that to me is a good example of something that, like we said in the tagline, helping to onboard the first 1 billion users of Web3, that will help to get us there. So it's a broad definition for how we're looking at things right now because we're really focused on great founders. If you're looking at decentralized companies, I think we've seen a lot happen with L2s, or level 2 blockchain protocols over the last couple of years. And I don't know how many more of those we need, but the interoperability layers between them are critically important. And to really truly realize that vision of being able to have these different blockchain protocols that you can move assets across completely safely without having to build these kind of mirror image bridging solutions. I think that, like I said, that there's so many gaps to fill in terms of how blockchains interact with real world assets, interact with consumers, interact with businesses, that I'm looking for those propositions around, infrastructure is a big word, but what are the things that it's going to make it easier to onboard, 1 billion users? Going back to the beginning of this in 2021, the first version of our thesis, Lex, really looked at 4 key things. Building community. Can the founder and the founding team do that storytelling and do that engagement with their potential users out there to build a community? Can they build the proper incentivization mechanism? People talk about things like tokenomics, and that you need to be able to have this Excel spreadsheet driven model on how your token is going to evolve probably over the first 18 to 24 months of the life of your token. And that spreadsheet of tokenomics really primes the pump of supply and demand for your token until natural market forces take over, where you do need a token to manage the production and consumption of services on your network. And being able to get to that point of where you've got true market forces that are one, keeping your token price at a certain level, but two, properly incentivizing users and developers to use and build on your network is a wonderful thing. The third thing we look for is that composability, and that goes along with it, that prior concept of this whole idea of, and I know that you've spoken about this before at length, Lex, so I'll keep it short, but blockchain protocols can be viewed as Lego blocks, and not just Lego blocks that you build one on top of the other, but you build outwards, right? There's studs not on top, or Lego snot, as Lego enthusiasts call it, and that where you can build outwards. And we're looking for those projects that are recognizing that composability is a significant value add in the Web3 space, and pursuing that composability as a core feature of their project is important. The last one is where it all kind of comes together, this compounding effect, where if it is truly composable and you have the proper incentivization mechanism in place, that you're going to be attracting both users and developers. And when you can attract more developers, you're going to attract more users, and vice versa. And you get this nice little flywheel effect going. And I can't really be on any podcast at all, Lex, without saying the word flywheel. So I just needed to get that in there.
Well, flywheel, Malkovich. I think it's important to mention.
Exactly.
Pete, it's been great having you on. If our audience wants to learn more about you or about Techstars, where should they go?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Pete Townsend NV. And also you can get me on pete.townsend@techstars.com. Also on Telegram, on LinkedIn. You'll find me in a lot of different places, on Discord as well. So hard not to find these days, as everyone really is, right? Also on Techstars, our website is just, if you Google Techstars Web3, or you just go to techstars.com and look for the Web3 program, you'll find us there.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Lex. It's been great. Really appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. That's it for this week's episode of the Fintech Blueprint. For more technical deep dives into all things fintech and decentralized finance, check out fintechblueprint.com and grab a free subscription to the newsletter. This is Lex, and I'll see you next time.